Was Pac-12 football overrated this year? I say no.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights-free but Pac-2 dominated and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review, please. And thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So we're talking about the Pac-12 football season. We're talking about bowl season. We're talking about what the future Pac-12 football seasons could look like because, yeah, there could be future Pac-12 seasons that at least feel something like what we had this year. But if you remember back to about late September, through 3 weeks of the college football regular season, which is the greatest sport entity in the entire world, in my humble opinion, the Pac-12 had twice the number of teams ranked than the Miami Heatles made trips to the NBA final. That's a fancy way of saying there were 8 teams ranked and the Heatles went to the finals 4 times. They were promising not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5. But that's how many teams actually got ranked for the Pac-12 because of a startlingly good start to Pac-12 or for Pac-12 teams in non-conference play. And now that everything has played itself out over the course of the season, I think it's really easy to look back at this year and say, oh, see, it was the same old Pac-12. Yeah, Washington was really good. And yeah, Oregon was good. But the rest of the conference, it just wasn't that good. You know, I mean, they just look at the records and look at how many teams ended ranked at the end of the season. How many teams you have ranked at the end of your regular season is a reflection of how many great teams you have in your conference, more than it is a reflection of how many good teams you have in your conference. This is especially true as it pertains to the Pac-12. And my argument that the Pac-12 was not overrated this year, and I thought going into the year, it's going to be the best quarterback conference in the country. Fact check, it absolutely was. And I felt throughout the year that it was the best and deepest conference in the country. Once again, fact check true. They've got an undefeated champion in the college football playoff. They've got another team in the New Year's Six. And they had significant non-conference wins that set up an epic conference slate. But what happened is what happens every year. It just didn't happen to the extent that it has in past years. You had 2 great teams in Washington and Oregon, and then you had a lot of really good teams. And so now that bowl season is starting to wind down, and no, you can't have the same takeaways for every game. I'm going to talk about that more later in the show. But my argument about the Pac-12 not having been overrated this year goes something like this. When you look at the non-conference slate, I'm going to apply the logic that I don't always agree with, which is, well, a win may seem good at the time, but then as you play out the season, it's not as good or it doesn't look as good. That can be true. I think the right answer is somewhere in the middle. A win over Colorado for Oregon, 42-6, is not actually beating the number 19 team in the country. But when you beat a different team that doesn't go 1-7, including that particular game after their strong start, then more conclusions can be drawn. So that's where we're going to get to here. So if you remember back to the non-conference slate, Washington State for the second straight year beat Wisconsin. And again, I'm applying the logic that many in this particular camp in the college football world use, which I understand. I don't always use it, but I get where they're coming from here, which is, well, what does that win really mean when you look at the larger context of the season? Well, we can look at that. Washington State was not able to become bowl eligible in the Pac-12. They beat a bowl team out of the Big Ten. Colorado was not able to become bowl eligible in the Pac-12. They won one conference game. One. They won just one conference game. They beat TCU and Nebraska, who, if Colorado was as bad as people maybe think, or as bad as they looked sometimes during Pac-12 conference play, they would have Nebraska or TCU made a bowl game because both finished at 5-7. Utah in the non-conference dominated Florida and then beat Baylor. You can look back at Baylor and say, hey, that was a terrible team. Okay, yeah, Baylor had a really bad season. They were not a very good team. What about Florida, though? What about Florida? Because Florida was playing for bowl eligibility in the last week of the regular season. They went toe-to-toe with a Florida State team that some people think at that point in time should have made the college football playoff. I was not in that particular camp. I'm not going to talk about what happened in the Orange Bowl against the Bulldogs because that's a longer conversation. But for Florida, that's a team that was able to beat one of the quote-unquote good SEC teams in Tennessee. They actually beat them by 13 points. Utah housed them. That was with Bryson Barnes, by the way. Washington played Michigan State. Now, Michigan State was terrible, but they beat them by a margin of victory that was very similar to what Ohio State beat Michigan State by, which is at least demonstrative for a singular data point of, hey, those two teams are kind of on a similar level there. And guess what? They were not the same. Washington's better, but Ohio State was really good this season. Now, I'm not saying every non-conference outcome was amazing for the Pac-12 this year. Oregon, when you look back on it, going into Lubbock and, almost losing to Texas Tech, not great. Not a great result there. Arizona, going back and losing to Mississippi State, even on the road, not great. Not great. Do I feel like that game would be different if it were played today with Noah Fifita in there? Yeah, probably. But those results, Cal losing at home to Auburn, not great. I thought Cal would win that game. A lot of Bears fans probably feel they should have won that game. So it was not a perfect record, but I am not in the business of going back and discounting all of those wins, many of which were impactful. And look, some did not end up being as impactful in the eyes of the college football world as the season continued to go on. But I think that there's still an element of Pac-12 bias out there, or anti-Pac-12, anti-West Coast bias, whatever you want to call it. Because when cannibalization exists in the SEC, it's always viewed differently every single time. I don't think the SEC earned that this year. They got that respect anyway. But what the Pac-12 did this season was they went out and had an excellent non-conference slate. It really could not have gone that much better. Cal beating Auburn or Arizona beating Mississippi State is the only way it could have been a substantively better non-conference slate, is having a win over the SEC. That being said, the rest of it went exceptionally well. But the SEC cannibalization is always viewed differently. It always has been. And for the foreseeable future, it probably will be, especially in the Power 2 conference era that we're essentially moving into. I think you really have the SEC as a power conference, the Big Ten as a power conference, the ACC and the Big 12 are on the next tier. They're power adjacent, shall we call them. But Tennessee being ranked is, of course, the quintessential example because they lose to Florida, who doesn't even make a bowl game. They lost by 13 points, by the way. It wasn't like, oh, they lost on a Hail Mary or something like that. No. They just lost. They were just the worst football team in that particular game. They had two top 10 matchups, or teams that ended up being top 10 programs by the end of the year, against Georgia and Missouri. They lost 36-7 and 38-10. Colorado lost 42-6 and fell out of the top 25. They were 3-1. They still had a win that at the time was a ranked win over TCU that had just been in the national championship game. They still had a win over a Power 5 opponent in Nebraska. They didn't look great against Colorado State, but then they get housed by Oregon. They fell out of the top 25 immediately. Tennessee gets housed not once by a top 10 team, but twice, and they get to hang around. So that's where I stand on the Pac-12. I think it was every bit as good of a season as we thought it was going to be, as we thought it was when the season began over the first few weeks. I think you even look at a team like USC that went with their backup quarterback and beat the team by 14 points in the Holiday Bowl that was in the ACC championship game. I think this was every bit as strong a conference as we thought it was, as we thought it could be. And I do not think for a second that just because these teams beat up on one another, that makes the conference weaker. That means you didn't have as many great or dominant teams. It does not mean the conference was as good or as strong as you thought it was. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. I imagine people will have some thoughts. I have some thoughts about what you should do with FanDuel, and that's get over there as soon as possible because the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, which is America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, whether you win or lose. It does not get any easier than that. You don't even have to be right on said $5 bet. But guess what? You'll get 150 in bonus bets either way. The app is super easy to use. They've got a great interface, and there are so many different ways to bet. You can have live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find popular parlays. Maybe you'll be that guy. I don't know if the story was actually legit or not, who had the $5 into hundreds of thousands or anything like that. That could be you, maybe, over at FanDuel. So they've got that and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an absolute layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Okay, so that conversation about how to assess the Pac-12, how strong was it really? Look at what they're doing in bowl games. Arizona looked great. Oregon State looked terrible. Can you really adjudicate what a team was throughout the course of the season in this era? This question came via the Twitter mentions, which are always open at @LO_Pac-12 or at Smalls_55. DMs and mentions wide open. You can drop a question in the YouTube comments as well. This one came in from Nickel Sandwiches. I love the guys who come up with the unique names out there. I mean, nobody else has ever been Nickel Sandwiches. Why plural? Why not Nickel Sandwich one? I don't know. You tell me. With opt-outs and transfers, should they rank teams following bowl games? This is unfortunately the world of college football that we are living in. It is not one that I care for. Now, I still love college football, but there are aspects of it that I do not care for. I still love bowl season. I still think it is fun. I like having college football on my television. It's entertaining. It's a fun product. You can still learn a lot about teams. Though, can you have as substantive takeaways as you could, 10, 15 years ago? No. Clearly, the answer to that question is no. And Kirby Smart had some good comments about that after their win against Florida State. He said, yeah, well, Florida State losing a bunch of guys absolutely impacted the game as his team mopped the floor with them 63-3. You think Georgia was making a statement there? Georgia that was playing without Brock Bowers and a number of other players, you don't think they were making a statement of like, hey, committee, you left this out. You felt that this team was better, that team was better. And by the way, I thought the committee got it right. I think it should be a combination in the 4-team era, and this applies to the 12-team at-large bids as well, of the best and most deserving, a combination of the two. I would put it on a 10 or 20-point scale if I had to vote personally, and I'd apply 5 or 10 points to one category, 5 or 10 to the other, and see which teams come up with the highest point total, because I think that's how you make the best product in college football. But the committee doesn't always see it that way. So with the opt-outs and transfers and the horrible messed up calendar that is college football, which makes fundamentally no sense at all. There's no logic to it whatsoever. I don't want to hear about, well, they have to get to their new school, for school and classes. If you wanted to make that stuff work and find some workarounds, make exceptions for those athletes, yeah, you could do it. It wouldn't, I don't think it would be very hard. I don't buy that excuse whatsoever. It's just the sport and the powers that be don't understand the sport very well. And that's why we have a national signing day before bowl season, why you have a transfer portal window before the season ends. There's no logic to any of this sort of stuff. So should they rank teams following bowl games? My answer is no. I think that your final AP ranking, because that's the first poll that we will get come 2024, or that, a lot of AP voters will base their preseason AP poll on, is where did you finish in last year's poll? It matters. It absolutely should. The interconnectedness of seasons like that is one of the elements that has always made college football unique, because in a sport with 133 FBS programs, you have to have some, and it's inherently going to be subjective, mechanism to determine who the best teams are and keep both casual and highly engaged fans aware of, okay, who's good, who's not, who's deserving, who isn't. So, because as Josh Pate always liked to say correctly, you are not where your record says you are. So I think that for bowl games and opt-outs, it's a bad combination because it makes bowl season less interesting. I'm happy for the guys who get an opportunity that wouldn't otherwise have gotten one. I think that's a good thing. I think that's a fun element of it. I think for fans, it can be cool to see, hey, like Ohio State, for instance, you got some really clear information. Kyle McCord transfers out. Here comes Devin Brown and Lincoln Keenholz, and oops, they scored 3 points. 3. 1, 2, 3. Not 3 touchdowns, 3 points. That makes you think going into spring football, is Aaron Noland going to be the quarterback as a true freshman? Because neither of those guys were super impressive. Well, but he didn't have Marvin Harrison. Well, still had Emeka Egbuka and a couple other really good players. So there's still conclusions for fans to draw, and it's still worthwhile to watch if you're a fan of a team that's in a bowl game. And I always encourage fans to do so just because you only get, if your team is bowl eligible and not going to the playoff or making a run, you get 13 chances to watch your team play football every year. That's it. 13 days out of 365. You got 13. Make the most of it. But I wouldn't rank them. I wouldn't rank teams following bowl games. I think that so many teams, and it doesn't apply to everybody. You look at Louisville, for instance, they were, I don't know how many opt-outs they had, but I know that their quarterback was playing. They were going against a USC team that didn't have their quarterback. Well, that should count arguably negatively against Louisville in a significant way and positively in favor of USC. I think they'll continue ranking teams after bowl games, and that'll be a credit to teams that, have players stick around or play in the game or, that go out and actually win their bowl games. And I guess that's a way to keep some level of inherent motivation as to how you make a game competitive, and how you make a team care about winning the game, even if it's not the bowl game that they necessarily wanted to play in. But I think for a lot of teams, it still does mean a lot. I mean, you think winning that bowl game, was it the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State? You think that meant anything to Missouri and Eli Drinkowitz, the SEC Coach of the Year? I got $50. It says it did. Anybody that wants to take the other side of the bet, you hit me up on the DMs. I don't think I will, of course. And that obviously is not a serious offer. But you get the point I'm making here. Like, there are still teams that win bowl games and say, hey, that means something to us. To beat a team from this conference, to beat this particular program, to, play like this to end the year, to carry that into the offseason matters to a lot of teams. But can you apply the same standard to every game? No. And that's why I don't think that teams should be ranked in the AP poll reflective of what they did in their bowl game. I don't think it should matter because so many teams are so different. I mean, if you were to honestly rank, think about this, Florida State. If you were to honestly rank that Florida State team that went out and played Georgia without Brock Bowers and a bevy of other transfers or opt-outs, but I think he was the most notable player to be a starter that didn't play in that game. If you were to judge that Florida State team, would you rank them as a top 10 team? No. There's no other team in the country that you would have ranked at all after losing a game 63-3. And I know this because Oregon lost to Georgia last year 49-3. They were the preseason number 11 team in the country. They fell out of the top 25. They got back into it a couple weeks later, but they had to earn their way back into it. So I don't think that, the bowl season structure that we're currently in and the way that the people who run college football have, and influence college football have allowed the sport to get to this point. It's unfortunate. I still enjoy bowl season. I still think it's good. But can you make rankings? Is it the same? No, it's clearly not. I mean, so many teams. Look at Oregon State. Playing with their third string quarterback, without their starting running back, their number 2 receiver, their leading tackler, a member of the secondary, and the 2 starting tackles. It's not like those guys were injured and couldn't play in the game. Those guys weren't on the team anymore. They weren't even there. I think Martinez might have been there but didn't play. I don't remember. But I struggle to put any weight in a ranking sense behind something that has become so heavily devalued. And that's one of the reasons that I lament it, because it used to be a more exciting part of the year. Now everyone is just kind of sitting around waiting for the playoff to start. I'm one of those college football sickos. I'm a diehard, so I will watch, a Birmingham Bowl or Western Kentucky's 28-point comeback against Old Dominion. Once that started, I was flipping it on the TV and watching that. It's electric. It's absolutely electric. But should it count? No, I don't think so, because your final AP poll ranking, which will influence the preseason poll for next year and where people's heads are at with a particular team. Look at Oregon State. Would Oregon State in the middle of the year have played Notre Dame and lost 40-8? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But we saw that in a bowl game, saw it on the field, so it could influence people. And I don't think it should. All right, so before I get to one final topic for today's show about the Pac being a power conference again one day, something that I wanted to note, because there were two examples of this out there, and I just think that college football fans should be aware and should be wary of the sort of information that will get clicks. It's the definition of clickbait. So there have been, and by the way, both of these happen to have come from the same account, I think. Or one of them was different, I think. But the account known as Blue Bloods Bias was getting pushback from Noah Fifita's father, who is the father of the Arizona quarterback. It was this idea that Fifita and McMillan were going to command these big NIL offers, but the graphic that the guy used, and this is textbook clickbait. It was a picture of Fifita and Tetairoa McMillan, and it said portal. If you see that, for guys of that caliber who are that talented and that good, you're going to, of course, click on it, share it, retweet, and a lot of people are going to see it and not even think about it. That's how clickbait works. And I as someone who is in the media space, and I want people to click on my videos, I actively do not go out there and mislead people. Yeah, I'll give you something that's interesting that pertains to what I'm talking about. I'm not going to make any bones about that with the thumbnails that I put out on Twitter and YouTube. But I am never going to mislead you like that. And I think it is irresponsible for people that have a platform like that to do so. And I think it is really, really wrong. So Les Fifita pushed back on that because he said, man, people just tweet out anything for clicks, which is true, which is very, very true. There was also, and I forget which side had put it out, a report that Kyle Williams, the wide receiver at Washington State, was in the transfer portal. He is not. He pushed back on that. And then Jake Dickert followed up with a tweet. And there was also, for a few weeks, a fake Jake Dickert account that was going around out there, which, like, who is that loser? What basement dweller is out there making a fake Jake Dickert account? I hope it's a bot, not a real person, because goodness gracious, I don't know what you are doing with your life if you think that that is a worthwhile endeavor. But Kyle Williams, a wide receiver at Washington State, responded to the tweet, said, nope, I'm a Coug. And Jake Dickert said, not only is he not in the portal, he's never been in the portal, he's never asked to be in the portal. So I just want to caution everybody out there. When you see something on Twitter specifically, this time of year in the transfer portal era, it is a really easy thing to monetize and capitalize on for anonymous Twitter accounts with people who are running it in a nameless and faceless fashion, who do not have to have any, shred of credibility out there. That stuff will be common. So just know who you are following, know what you are reading, and just take the time to do it. And don't be somebody who goes out there and spread stuff that is incorrect. And every time that I come on this show, I have either read from a reliable source or talked to a reliable source that I trust, and I verify the information to the best of my ability. And if I get something wrong, if I say something and it was not correct, if I misquoted somebody, or if I said a stat was wrong or whatnot, and someone brings it to my attention, I go out there and correct it. I come on the show and correct it all the time, because I try to be honest with you all, because I think you deserve that, and I think everybody does. And I hated seeing that crap. And it deserves to be called out, and I just hope that everybody's aware of it here. Okay, back into a regular topic on the show. This mailbag question from David. Again, YouTube, Twitter, always available to answer your guys' questions. Hi, Spencer. Love the show. Appreciate you. It's been a great ride with the realignment, and it's been cool to hear your thoughts on it. With all the discussion of whether a rebuilt Pac-12 would be a power conference or group of five, it would cool to see an episode on what makes a power conference. I mean, some of the Mountain West is borderline, like Boise State and San Diego State. History says G5 teams can make the jump. So if Oregon State and Washington State add enough borderline teams to rebuild the Pac, then maybe, just maybe, it would eventually graduate to a power conference, I would think. Could be a good listen either way. So I can absolutely do a bigger show on this, but I wanted to just kind of address it off the top because I think there's an interesting point as it pertains to the Pac. The question of whether or not the Pac-12 can rebuild is clear. Yes, it can. Will it? We'll see. We'll see. Maybe Oregon State and Washington State just want to operate as independents until they feel like the Big 12 or ACC or comes to pick them up, or they get scooped up in realignment if they go to two conferences or something like that. Those are all separate conversations there. But the vision that I have laid out to rebuild the Pac-12 includes 4 teams from the American Conference and 6 teams from the Mountain West. So when I laid out those teams, my thinking was I would like to see the league build itself to be the premier group of 5 conference in college football. Now, the status of being a group of 5 or a power 5 oftentimes comes down to money. That is a huge consideration. The amount of capital investment that exists at a particular school within the athletic department and the commitment that that university makes to its athletic programs, what level they fund at. That's how much they can pay coaches with NIL. That's how much they can pay players, what sort of facilities they have, how they travel. Like there are a bunch of differences between, FCS, group of 5, Power 5, if you're just talking about college football. And then those athletic departments more broadly, the higher level you are, the more well-funded your non-revenue sports are going to be, naturally. So I just thought of who's on first. No, you don't. You throw it to who? Naturally. That's what I'm saying. Okay. Greatest comedy sketch of all time. I'm a huge stand-up comedy guy, and oh my gosh, who's on first? Just the absolute greatest, Abbott and Costello. But anyway, I digress. So for the Pac to rebuild into the premier group of 5 conference has legitimate, tangible benefits. Whether or not that could become a power conference one day, that seems highly unlikely, because one of the elements that factors into whether or not you're considered a group of 5 or a power 5 is the prestige of universities. And in this instance, to a slight extent, simply the athletic departments that you are associated with. And so when you're a conference, you can add a group of 5 team, and eventually, they get Power 5 status immediately, but they don't start performing or spending or fundraising at a Power 5 level for many, many years. So if you're a conference like the Big 12, for instance, without Oklahoma and Texas, and before adding the schools from the Pac-12, was bordering on being a group of 5 conference, because I think it was still in the power designation, but certainly nowhere near the Big 10 or the SEC. You add in Utah, Colorado, Arizona State, and that suddenly looks like a more legitimate league there. Because to get up to the level of where the top teams in the sports are at, it can't happen overnight. You can have really good seasons at the group of 5 level. You can have really good teams, really good programs. You can have a lot of money at the group of 5 level. Still, there is another gear to get with the top of the line, the creme de la creme, best of the best, top shelf, whatever you want to call it, in college sports. So if you throw too many teams, and I don't know that there's an exact number, I'd say the Big 12 was bordering, but certainly having only 2 teams that have ever been at the Power 5 level with 10 who are not and have never been in the modern era of college sports, that is not going to be considered a Power 5 conference, and I don't think it should. Now, over time, if it were to remain, then yeah, it could evolve. Our perception of it could change. The amount of money that it draws, the amount of interest that it draws, the television ratings that they're able to generate, all of that can change over time. But building a power conference, you can't do it in one move. You can do it in several moves, but it takes a really long time. I mean, look at the SEC or the Big Ten. It's a power conference. How do we know that? Because they've got a bunch of schools and brands that compete at a high level, that get a lot of television viewership, and have universities, especially in the Big Ten, that are highly accredited institutions. And so when you have all those factors together, you can't put that in the microwave. It has to be done in the crock pot. And so technically one day, if the Pac-12 were to rebuild in 2 years, as I laid out on a recent episode of the show, and if you've got questions about that, of course, drop it in the YouTube comments or on Twitter. If they were to do that, and somehow that's how conferences remain for the next 30 years, we could view the Pac differently 5 years from now as we could 25 years from now. That is a possibility, not a certainty, but a possibility. And so the leagues that are the power conferences have got teams, brands, in some instances, media markets, though, Tuscaloosa is not a major media market. Athens, I guess they get the Atlanta media market and such, but that can all, that could remain, and the Pac could one day be considered a power conference, but it would take a very long time, because look at the teams that just made the jump from the Group of Five level to even the Big 12, which is not the best conference this year. I think it was probably, I don't know, that or the ACC. Those are the two weakest power conferences. Look at how they did. Only one of them made a bowl game. Cincinnati had a lot of success at the Group of Five level, didn't make a bowl game. UCF is the only one that got to a bowl game, and they lost it. So it takes time. That's why it's complicated, but I can definitely, I'll probably dive into that on tomorrow's show, that'll be a Washington show, but appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.